Please welcome the Education Director for FDIC and the Editor-in-Chief of Fire Engineering, Bobby Halton.
Good morning, and welcome to the 84th Fire Department Instructors Conference. On behalf of everyone at Fire Engineering and Penwell Corporation, I would like to thank you for joining with us in the celebration of fire service training this morning. Please join with me in one more round of applause for the beautiful music, the incredible display of honor to our nations, and the inspiring words of Father McCaslin. You know, it's an honor to be allowed to recognize all of the wonderful people who have participated in the opening ceremony this morning, and to be able to thank all of the instructors, volunteers, and staff who have made this conference the incredible success that it's been so far. I cannot in words alone express our deep appreciation for the selfless efforts of all the wonderful fire departments of Northern Indiana, the numerous public safety organizations of Marion County, the Indiana Convention Center, the good citizens of Marion County. And I know I speak for every instructor and student in the room when I also express our deepest appreciation for the incredible generosity of the countless manufacturers and vendors who have supported us over the last 2 days of training. Without all of these incredible partners and their selfless generosity and their commitment to firefighter safety and excellence, we could not do the hands-on training that we just successfully completed. And so to everyone who has contributed, to everyone who has sacrificed, and to everyone who has helped produce FDIC 2012, please accept this round of applause from all of us who have benefited so greatly from your generosity. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment, and I'd like to thank Joel Olson, our bell ringer. And I'd also like you to all stand with me for a moment, if you would, please. And if we could just share a moment in silence and dedicate the rest of this conference to our good friend, Rich Nappy, who fell in the line of duty. Thank you. Rich was one of us, an instructor, part of the FDIC family. He'll be missed. God bless you, Richie. My friends, this current generation of fire service is for the first time experiencing cutbacks, reductions, furloughs. We're also dealing with a growing new set of tactical threats, a changing fireground environment, and an increasingly more complex set of duties, responsibilities, and expectations. We have faced similar challenges before. A generation ago and the generation before that, economically, socially, politically, and tactically. We had excellent leadership through those difficult days. We were blessed to have men of integrity, and those leaders gathered here at FDIC as we gather today, finding solutions to the problems of their day, exchanging ideas with other visionary leaders, and overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Today, new visionaries meet at this 84th FDIC, working together to find today's answers. We come as our forefathers came before us to share and debate, to learn and to grow, because we cannot afford the luxury of wallowing in self-pity, complaining, whining, demanding, or protesting our plight, for much greater is needed from us. Despite conditions, despite limitations, we gather to find the most effective ways to serve in today's reality, but always with the eye of a promise of a brighter tomorrow. I recently had the honor of sitting on a panel with several distinguished fire service leaders, and as you would expect, the issue of declining budgets came up. One chief mentioned how he was upset that the fire service had seemed to have lost the respect that we earned on 9/11. It was no longer meaningful to the public. He said he feels like the public had turned on us and that we were being targeted. He suggested that the fire service needed to unify around our national major organizations and speak with one voice. He said that these organizations should form a committee to come up with a plan to regain our lost respect and somehow stop the furloughs, the layoffs, and the brownouts. The chief's a wonderful man, a dedicated firefighter. But three things struck me after listening to him. First is that he believes a group of incredibly and intentionally ideologically diverse groups can unify to speak as one on any issue. Second was his perspective on honor. The honor of 9/11 belongs to those who responded that day, and especially to the 343 men who never went home that day, and not the entire fire service. I did nothing to earn that honor, and arguably neither did any but a few in this room today. That honor belongs to 343 men who will never see their wives and children again, and those who responded with them that day and survived. The honor of that day is theirs, and theirs alone. And the final thing that struck me after my friend... The final thing that struck me after my friend spoke was his belief in committees to solve our problems. That belief is misguided. That is not how the fire service or Western civilization has advanced and thrived. Rather, that's a path to mediocrity and failure. When we take a broader view, it doesn't take one long to recognize that committees rarely, if ever, find solutions. It doesn't take long to recognize that large organizations exist to perpetuate large organizations. They don't exist to create innovation, but rather to maintain the status quo. And that does not mean that they are bad organizations or that the status quo is something that's undesirable. Oftentimes, that's exactly what we need. But to find innovation, to find invention, to find answers to difficult problems, look not to committees, look not to large organizations, but rather look to those individuals who are involved in those situations and who teach. Ask them what they would do if they could make it different, if they could make it better, if they could make it more effective, more meaningful, and more efficient. If you want to find answers to today's fireground problems, ask the men and women in this room. A few weeks ago, I got to hear another chief speak. He mentioned how they use this visual image of this bicycle racing Peloton to describe the strength and unity of the command staff. The Peloton's that main group of bicycle racers where they take turns leading, drafting to try to win. One of the tactics that the chief mentioned was what bicycle racers call making a breakaway. A breakaway is when a team member or two team members sprint away from the Peloton in an effort to build a lead. The chief mentioned that breakaways sometimes were unproductive wastes of energy. The chief has a point. Sometimes breakaways are only interested in self-glorification and personal gain. Then there are the breakaways that are motivated by the pursuit of excellence. Solution-oriented, innovative, visionary, which challenge the status quo. In the fire service, major innovations and tremendous contributions have been made by members who broke away. And it's interesting when we look at the people involved in breakaways, the most significant are usually led by a teacher, an instructor. These innovators often find a partner who shares their vision and who has the courage to ride with them towards solutions that others just can't see or understand. One of the earliest examples of breakaways in history resulted in saving our Western culture. Let me take you back for a moment to around 480 BC, when the Greeks were getting ready to do battle against the Persian Empire. 20 years earlier, the Greeks had been able to defeat the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. But now the Persians were back, and the Persians had assembled the largest army in recorded history. Wars in those days were fought exclusively on land, and the larger army almost invariably won the day. There was no way, given conventional warfare tactics of the day, that the Greeks could stand a chance against an army of 1 million soldiers. But here's where a breakaway visionary made all the difference. Luckily for Greece, the Athenians had chosen as their leader a brilliant man named Themistocles, a teacher of rhetoric, an instructor. Themistocles recognized something that no one else did, that the Greeks needed a larger navy to defeat the Persians and not a larger army. The Greek fleet at the beginning of the war was about a third the size of the Persians. But the Greeks had Themistocles, and he had a breakaway partner named Leonidas. Leonidas, along with around 300 of his incredibly well-trained Spartan soldiers and about 7,000 other Greeks, were going to sacrifice themselves at a choke point about 20 yards wide called Thermopylae Pass. This is the legendary battle that everyone focuses on. Staffing of 7,000 against 1,000,000. Impossible odds. But it was never meant to be a successful tactic. In fact, it was a suicide mission. All that Leonidas and Themistocles had hoped for was to achieve a holding tactic so that the Persian navy would get ahead of the Persian army. Plan worked perfectly. Persian navy was decimated. Leonidas and his 300s were immortalized. The real breakaway here, visionary here, though, was not Leonidas. It was Themistocles, the instructor, the first man to recognize how to cripple an army is to take away its supply chain. In our fire service history, around 1880, high-rises began to dominate our landscapes. Tragedies began to occur, and firefighters were faced with new and daunting challenges of resources, construction methods, and materials. I should also mention that around this time, the U.S. was experiencing a depression. Fortunately for the fire service, a breakaway FDNY commissioner, Peroy, stepped up. Peroy faced his version of the Persians, the new high-rise building, built of wood and cast iron, protected by concrete, often with only one stairwell, open elevator shafts, and standpipes out in the hallways. The old tactics were failing. Resources were limited, and the challenges seemed insurmountable. But Peroy stepped forward with boldness and innovation. He developed new tactics. He pioneered coordinated ventilation and attack from multiple points. He took the lessons learned from the tragedies of the day, and he made sure that the tactics and the building codes evolved with each opportunity. A generation later, in the 40s and 50s, during yet another economic slowdown, we saw the beginning of a new generation of high-rise, the central core, along with new synthetic components and a loss of compartmentalization. Here again, the fire service faced new and daunting challenges, but breakaway visionary John O'Hagan, FDIC instructor and innovator, rose to the task. O'Hagan did live fire tests on high-rise buildings, and he adapted and adjusted our existing tactics to meet our new challenges. Throughout the 60s and the 70s, he instructed the fire service on how to overcome another seemingly insurmountable obstacle. One of you here today, like Themistocles, like O'Hagan, sees that hidden potential that we can capitalize on. One of you is going to make that breakaway and teach us how to beat today's fires. Someone in this audience is going to recognize something that none of us see right now. Just as Peroy and O'Hagan beat the high-rise and Themistocles beat the Persians, we will beat today's fire problems. Impossible is only impossible if you give in and surrender. Firefighters see only solutions. We never give up. And I argue that it's one of you seated here today because innovation, solutions, new tactics have been the hallmark of FDIC history. Here we embrace the breakaway. Here we follow in the footsteps of giants. We respect our history and the values of our forefathers. Hard work, individual rights, the freedom to dream great dreams and achieve great success. We all remember when Washington first took command of the Continental Army. He was surrounded by men of tremendous military bearing, far better credentials than Washington, and they had little respect for Washington. Actually, they worked to undermine him at every opportunity. They also insisted in engaging the British in very standard traditional European tactics, and they did so with fatally unsuccessful results. Washington, however, was a breakaway, and his partner was Nathaniel Greene, an educator who built one of the first schools in Rhode Island. Greene and Washington, before the war, had been involved in fighting with the Indians and the French. There they learned the value of guerrilla warfare and hit-and-run tactics. Greene was able to engage the British in a set of brilliant hit-and-run battles. Together, Washington and Greene managed to defeat the most powerful army on the face of the planet. And they did it by being breakaways, by challenging that status quo, and by being innovative and creative. And never once did they rely on any organization or any committee. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. Just as in the 50s and 60s, as the fire service was challenged with new construction methods and materials, new larger fuel loads composed of synthetic materials which had fires overwhelming our resources and defeating our dated tactics, FDIC breakaway instructor Emanuel Freed and Bill Clark again challenged the status quo. Armed with new tactical innovation that they developed by observing fire behavior and modifying the accepted tactics of the day, they created tremendously effective methods. They were able to make tremendous changes, and they did it by teaching. They didn't have a committee or an organization. They had grit and determination. They had courage. They had vision. And in this audience today is someone who's going to come up with those hit-and-run tactics of tomorrow. In this audience today is the guerrilla firefighter. Which one of you is our next Washington, Greene, Freed, or Clark? The single most important breakaway, though, in the history of civilization comes to us from World War II. After Hitler had marched all through Europe, he prepared to invade England. Outmanned, outgunned, and isolated from the rest of the world, the nation of England was looking down the barrel of a gun. But as powerful as Hitler's army was, Hitler understood that in order to invade successfully, he needed to control the airspace. Hitler gave his generals 6 months to destroy the Royal Air Force. Now, up to this point, aeronautical warfare was fought much like ground warfare. Like forces or superior forces would win the day. Everyone understood this. And for the British, that meant annihilation. But Churchill didn't put a lot of faith in the status quo, and neither did a breakaway flight instructor, Commander Hugh Dowling. Sir Hugh assumed command of the RAF in '36, and despite the conventional belief at the time that the era of the fighter aircraft was over, he refused to accept that theory. When he took command of the RAF, it looked pretty much as it did during World War I. But miraculously, in 4 years, during horrific economic times, he managed to bring into service 2 new fighter aircraft. He incorporated radar. He created a new centralized means of aircraft control. But most importantly, he devised a new strategy bent on bleeding the German Luftwaffe dry. The Germans and everyone else expected the British to send up every plane they could to stop the bombers, but not Sir Hugh. At the beginning of the Battle of Britain, the British had roughly 700 aircraft. The Germans had 3,000. But Dowling refused to play the conventional tactic. He would only send up a handful of planes, regardless of the size of the threat. The result was that the British kept showing up. The Germans couldn't understand where the British were getting their aircraft from. The invasion date kept being postponed over and over and over again. Finally, a frustrated Hitler turned his attention to Russia. I should mention that the men who saved the world were kids, really. Only about 1,000 of them. Average age somewhere between 17 and 22. Some of them died on their very first flight. Their suitcases were never opened. By the war's end, 1/3 of them would be dead. But Western civilization, Christian civilization, was saved by 2 breakaways and an army of childhood heroes. Someone sitting here in this audience today recognizes the value of the pumper for fighting today's fires as Dowling recognized the fighter aircraft in World War II. One of you sees a new technology as Dowling recognized radar. An instructor in this audience has that new deployment model, that radical new strategy. But above it all is our passion. Regardless of how much we get cut back, regardless of how many furloughs or brownouts or closures that we are forced to endure, we will continue, as did the RAF, to show up despite the odds, despite the dangers, despite the risks, because the rewards of our work are so great. We will show up. We will never quit. Every visionary in this audience should do well to remember that the established voices of the day threw Churchill out and were kissing up to Hitler until he came guns blazing. Then they couldn't get Churchill back fast enough. So do not let today's established voices drown you out. Do not for 1 minute think that anybody knows any more than you do. Do not think that anybody has any more of a right to be heard than you do, or that any organization has answers that you don't. Our generation has been blessed to celebrate with legendary breakaways. Leo Stapleton, Ray Downey, Alan Brunacini, Frank Brannigan, Tommy Brennan. The generation before us had Dick Sylvia, McCaslin, Emanuel Freed, John O'Hagan, and Billy Clark. Some firefighters sitting here today might not know it, but if it wasn't for the breakaway efforts of Leo Stapleton working with the folks from NASA, air packs might still be a work in progress. Commissioner Stapleton was among the first to recognize the value of the air pack, and he fought tremendous opposition, but he made sure that the air pack was available to the fire service. As disasters unfold and we respond in USAR and SUSAR task force teams, providing the most efficient, coordinated, and well-trained response in the history of firefighting, firefighters should never forget that it's only possible because of the visionary breakaway FDIC instructor, Deputy Chief Ray Downey. Breakaway FDIC instructor Alan Brunacini was the first to recognize the value of the Wildland Incident Command System in structural firefighting. Chief Brunacini worked tirelessly to introduce the structural command system to the fire service. And the chief also reminded us to be kind to Mrs. Smith, because we exist for her safety and not the other way around. The FDIC legend Tom Brennan, when everyone else was myopically obsessed with little drops of water, systems, and other training, refocused us all. Tommy reminded us that success on the fire ground is only assured through relentless pursuit of perfection at the task level. To all the breakaways who preceded us, we owe much. From those who follow, much is expected. You know, history might not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. Looking back at how we survived and thrived in the past, we learned two things. Economic depressions have come before in 1880, 1920, 30, 50, and even 70. Fireground challenges, high-rise, lightweight construction, changing fuel loads, and limited access to resources also seem to reoccur with every economic slowdown. But it is also apparent that our solutions fit a pattern. The next breakaway individual is coming. Seated here today is the next Themistocles O'Hagan, the next Freed or Clark, the next Stapleton or Downey. As to honor and respect, no one can cause us any disrespect. That comes only from insecurity, something that no one in our profession should ever suffer from. Rest assured that the citizens of North America respect us as much today as they did in 1880, 1950, or 2001. Our honor is intact. We display that honor every minute of every day in big cities and small towns. We earn our honor by our humility and our service to others. We honor our profession when we accept what we must, when we must, and we continue to serve confidently and courageously when we show up. You see, my friend was very wrong. Now is the time for the breakaway individual. As we look around this room, filled with the best and brightest minds in our profession, it is easy to see that we have little to fear and much to hope for. Every firefighter in this room knows that now is the time for courage and boldness. Now is the time to be strong and brave. From Arizona to New York, from Alberta to Calgary, now is the fire service's time to discover its new leaders, its new legends, its new visionaries. Now is your time, a time that many years from now, firefighters looking back will remember, and they will say that this was the fire service's finest moment. God bless you and welcome to FDIC 2012.